So yeah, welcome. Good to see all of you here. Thank you for taking your time. My name is Andreas Müller. I'm one of the co-leads of the IDL, the Immersive Design Lab at Design++. And I'm very thrilled to moderate this first talk. I'm very excited about this session with you, Chris. The seminar series is traditionally or originally organized by Design++. Design++ is the Center for Augmented Design and Architecture, Engineering and Construction. And it has kind of several big goals on its map. And one of the bigger ones is the knowledge transfer. And this is also why the seminar series was established a few years ago. Basically, in the beginning as an event for you guys. And from this semester on, it's also a lecture for PhD students. So welcome also all the students who subscribe for the lecture. And at this stage, also thank you for the Design++ team. Erika is not here, but Nijat is today responsible for the recording and also for visuals. And also thank you, Anton and Fabio, for the organization in the background, for preparing participants and suggesting participants. So thank you for this. We have a very interesting lineup for this semester. And the first talk is given by Chris. And if you missed some of the talks within this semester or of the previous semesters, and you're curious what was it all about, you can actually visit our YouTube channel and rewatch everything, as often as you wish, basically. Okay, so with this said, I would like to introduce Chris. Chris is a game designer and cultural heritage expert based in Zurich. He started to work on game design at Sony Computer Entertainment in London before making a career-defining detour into figurative oil painting. Who would have guessed, huh? Didn't expect that when reading. So the unusual mix of game art and classic art eventually inspired him to author a series of books that explore the relationship between traditional art practices and interaction design. His upcoming book is titled Kinesthetic Time Capsules, a game design method celebrating cultural heritage and identity, where he presents an innovative, empathy-driven method for game design to help broaden the aesthetic scope of this medium. Today's title of his presentation is Choose Your Nouns Wisely, How Affordances Shape Sensory Experience. In this talk, Chris explores the shared roots between game design and fields like architecture, engineering, and construction, showing how interactive mediums can deepen user experience and physically connect people across time and space. So with this said, thank you again for being here. Chris, the stage and the attention is yours.
So thank you very much. I think to Fabio especially for inviting me to participate in this seminar series. Thank you for the kind introduction. It might mean I can skip over a bit of the content in my opening slides, but it's a pleasure to meet you here, you up there as well. Hi there. I wanted to start by asking who plays video games? Out of you, sort of like just your hands up. So maybe like half. And of those of you who do play games, who thinks unquestionably that it's an art form equal to opera, classical music, and all of that? So a few. So okay, so the numbers dwindled a little bit in that second round. So it's my job in a way, or I feel so that it's my responsibility in a way to highlight the artistic value of games, and I hope I can do this in the slides that I have today. To kind of like explain a little bit where my ideas come from. So I did publish now a while back a book called Drawing Basics and Video Game Art. And it's a book that focuses on game art. And on one side you have maybe a Leonardo da Vinci and on the other Mario. And it was my way of highlighting the value of classical art or Gestaltung. So how can we better understand what were the methods of the old masters, and how can we then apply them in a more artistic way to make games more meaningful. But it was very much grounded in game art, sort of for a game artist working in the industry or aspiring to work in the games industry. My second book tried to make it more relevant to these concepts, this overlap between classical arts and games, to game designers, but I was still kind of rooted in this game art background that I have. But it was quite a successful book also, so it's called Interactive Stories in Video Game Art, and focuses on storytelling in interaction design. And as was kindly said a moment ago, my next book really, finally, after all this time, sort of over 10 years, I feel I finally got to bring value to classical arts, sort of integration into game design. And I have had some very wonderful citations from people, endorsements. Mark Forster, the Hollywood director, for instance, highlighted the transmedia storytelling value of my second book, and also a wonderful endorsement from Stefan Asadorian, so one of the founding members of the Assassin's Creed franchise, who also talked about the sort of the importance of using my work and its roots in classical arts to sort of like music in a way, to sort of like understand how we can make video games more meaningful, artistic, more resonant. And with that, I've had the opportunity to speak at a few prestigious venues, especially including ETH, of course, here this evening. So enough about me, more about what the topic. And does anyone recognize this? Have you ever seen this before? Oh, so one person, so great. So this is arguably the oldest board game in the world. So it's called the Royal Game of Ur. It was invented some 5,000 years ago by the Sumer civilization in modern-day southern Iraq, and it's believed to kind of represent, if you imagine a head being here, sort of the body. So you were kind of playing through a spiritual quest, and in many ways it's very much like Ludo. I'm sure, yeah, Ludo is actually a sort of direct inspiration, and games like Pakisi in Indian culture. So you have to kind of enter the race space and then kind of make your way to the exit. So it has a different shape to Ludo, but it's essentially that. And my question is, like, what can you do when you play this game? So anyone who's played Ludo kind of understands that you have dice, you have tokens, which you have to race around the track. The difference with this game are the tactile objects the components that you play with. So this is what the dice look like, tetrahedral dice, and these are the tokens. So each player, one of the two players has their own set. So the question is, what can you do? What can you do in this game? And often when we talk about video games, it's better to look at games in a very abstract sense, because this is a beautiful, decorated, original version of the Royal Game of Ur. But in terms of the game components, what are the players actually manipulating? Then it's these cylindrical discs which can capture or reset the opponent player's discs, tokens. We have safe squares, which are sort of kind of imaginary spaces as well, but they're on this kind of box-like board. And the tetrahedral dice, which give us the ability to move. So you roll the dice, and the outcome gives you a certain amount of steps that you can take within this space. And this is just a good way of thinking about games in general. It's not often, it's often more at this abstract level that we think about design. It's not the beautifully rendered, decorated, kind of historically accurate, potentially, objects that we are manipulating, but it's like, what affordances do we give the players? If we give them a sword, then of course they can slash things, they can fight. If we give them an axe, they can maybe throw it across a room and assassinate someone. And because we can't do everything in games, it's not reality, it's a very curated space in which gameplay happens. So we can often say it's a limited affordance space. And the affordances, of course, are defined by the verbs. What kind of actions can we do? And that's why in the previous slide it was to reset, to roll and move, to be safe in a way. So these are kind of verbs and the associated components, the nouns to which they are linked. In a game like Assassin's Creed, we have these affordances which tend to, are curated to make us behave like assassins. There's a very limited language that we can have with the NPCs, the characters within this space. And so to some extent, I don't know if anyone recognizes Bam Bam from the Flintstones. It's almost as if we're only saying, you know, that the only thing we can do is bam, 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 bam. That was the only thing that Bam could do. And his father would come along, he would bam, bam, swing his father around like a club. He would have a club, he would swing it around. An alien would come, he would swing that alien around saying bam, bam. And this is how we can imagine most games to be, that there's kind of limited set of affordances, and we can only communicate with this sword, slash, 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 or, you know, throw, throw, throw. And so it's important for us to reflect on these components. What are the components that we give players to manipulate? And what sort of affordance, what verbs do they give us, what to give players to use? And when we do that, we realize that like games in Assassin's Creed or the Mario kind of line of games, we're often embodying very healthy, agile bodies. You know, so it's characters that can jump, double jump, triple jump, jump off a wall. They can assassinate, you know, and re-energize. And so it's a very narrow spectrum of embodiment, of components that we are given to take control of and express ourselves in these virtual spaces. And so it feels like it's about time that by taking this into account, we can potentially start to think of other ways of interacting, or the possibilities that we give players to be themselves or be somebody else sort of within these games that we give them. And so this is an interesting quote from Walt Disney. So he said that at first the cartoon medium was just a novelty, but it never really began to hit until we had more than tricks. You have to have empathy in the thing. And of course, this is very true for video games as well as cartoons and comics. So comics were all about superheroes at the start, and animation was all about these kind of comic sketches where, I don't know, Mickey Mouse or someone goofy would step on a garden rake and get hit in the face. You know, and that's almost all that everyone imagined that these mediums were worthy of conveying. And with video games, we have the Assassin's Creed characters, we have the Mario characters, and it seems that everyone is sort of doesn't see the value outside of this space. But it's very important for us to start thinking in terms of empathy. What happens when we start to use empathy as a guiding design principle? So what if empathy, not conflict, was the organizing principle of game design? So looking at these nouns again, we have Assassin's Creed, a very agile, powerful character, stealthy. The objects that we give players to use are knives, daggers, axes. But I ask you now, what would happen if, for instance, we allowed players to embody a leaf petal? What if we allowed players to embody a hole in the ground? How does that change their sense of self and what the abilities they have to play in this environment? And we don't even have to go that far to imagine this, because there are actually games based on this. In a game like Flower, you embody a flower that is kind of aloft on the wind, and you go around these beautiful beautiful landscape, collecting more and more flower petals. And the idea is that this creates a completely different sense of embodiment and sense of self, you know, how you interact with this virtual space based on this very delicate object and the affordances that the designers have given you associated with that object. We can also look to what would it be like to be a hole in the ground, because there's a game about that. It's called Donut County. So you are a hole in the ground, and the hole gets bigger and bigger, and you start to consume these locations, you know, to funny effect. You grow bigger, and what is important, of course, is to look beyond the cartoony appearance of this and look at the components, as if we had X-ray vision and we could get rid of all the stylization, like this kind of pop colors and everything, and think back, okay, it's just a whole. How does that change my abilities to express myself, like Bam Bam, within this environment? And there are games that are even more meaningful, you could say. So there's one called Florence about the relationship between this couple, the ups and downs, and you play through very different gameplay vignettes. So it's a very complex experience that you arrive at the end. And even more meaningful, I would argue, is that Dragon Cancer, where it's an autobiographical game which was written by a couple who had a son who was born with terminal cancer. So this is, you play through their experiences, their positive experiences, and their very dark and depressing experiences. So the idea of games being fun is sometimes hard to argue when you have such serious subject matter. But it's always, for me, for this, especially for the topic of this talk, is to think about what are we embodying, what are we controlling, what are the components that we allow players to take control of, and what are the affordances that we give them associated with those nouns. And the last one is also linked to disability aesthetics. So this one's called The Graveyard. And your only task, the only gamified task, is just to reach the bench at the base of the church in the background. So what happens here is that, of course, there are no gameplay objectives like you would find in a Mario game. All it is just to experience what it's like to walk like this elderly person who cannot walk in a straight line, has to walk very slowly, and the steering keeps turning left and then a bit right. And so it's just to take your time. And of course, often what happens is there are conflicts of expectations. People who play games like Mario and Assassin's Creed often find it very hard to engage with content like this. But of course, that is another discussion altogether. What is important is that there are games that offer you different nouns and different verbs. So it's not just to walk or run, it's to walk awkwardly, or to walk slowly, or to walk contemplatively. So adjectives, attributive adjectives, become very important. So we have this concept, okay, that we choose the nouns. Which nouns we choose are very important because they shape the affordances that we give them. And those can be intrinsic affordances, like what is the physical value of a tetrahedron, or we can project those affordances to kind of imagine what these objects are through a shared kind of agreement, like we often do in game design. What is very fascinating for me is that the control that games have over us as players is very highly curated. We often, when we think of games or when we discuss games, we often discuss freedom, player freedom. And what this, the kind of the misunderstanding that usually arises from this is that we can literally do anything we want in this game, or so it's very, very personalized, the experience. But this study from a New York Times article, it studied 100,000 players in 10,000 games of League of Legends. What it highlighted is that, as it's written here, while each match is complex, the same patterns emerge over time. And so that means that we are seeing that players are repeating the same gestures when they're interacting with these games. Because so much of this environment is curated. We can think of it almost like a classical composition. There is the environment and the pathways. There is the character behavior, how fast the characters move, what are their abilities and their affordances, and all the interactions in there, that they are repeated. There's a lot of choice, and every match is different. Very, very memorable to sort of not so memorable, defeats, victories. But there's the physical interaction that is being shaped, and it's kind of repeatable. And so what we, in some ways, must see when we design games is not so much the decorative aspects of a board game or of a video game, but it's how it's shaping the players, not in the virtual space, but in front of the screen. What are they doing in real life? And so this is of course, sports are very closely related to board games and video games. And I find these time-lapse photos very interesting because they show us the sculptural value of the high jump. They show us the sculptural value of the diving discipline. And it's through this time lapse that we see how a sport like this, the components that are involved in the high jump, where you launch from, how high your trajectory is, how it's sculpting each player's body over time, and so that there's this repeatable pattern occurring. And so again, using this concept of this X-ray vision, we can start to find patterns in sports. We can start to find repeatable patterns in video games and board games, understanding sort of through lines of movement, how maybe the game mechanics, the nouns and the verbs that are part of the structural composition of these video games, how they're influencing the player, the physicality. And we can see these lines of movement as well in other sports like fencing. And so a colleague of mine who works at Riot Games on League of Legends did actually an art installation using, I think it was over 100 players of games of League of Legends, and he just tracked the mouse movements of the players, and turned those into drawings. And so this is like the kind of very much connected to that article from the New York Times, where we see that, again, even though each game is very unique and has its own victories and defeats, there is a repeatable pattern. There is this mass kinesthetic choreography to this game. So at any one time, there might be 700,000 players of League of Legends playing at the same time, and they're all doing this bottom left to top right gesture, all of them around the world. So not, of course, in sync. It's not like an American line dance, but it's more asynchronous. But there's a repeatable pattern. There's a choreography to this experience. And so what I do often with my students is we do sort of analog motion capture. Anyway, we watch gameplay footage of games like Journey, of Pac-Man and Vanquish. And what I ask them to do is just take a piece of paper, and it's called blind drawing, sort of an animation drawing technique, where we just stare at the screen and you just have to follow the character around and just react to what the character's doing. When they turn left, you draw left. When they turn right, when they twist, or when it's a bit more aggressive, of course, you respond with a different aesthetic, a different bodily reaction. So you're kind of trying to simulate to get a feeling for what the player who recorded this gameplay footage might have experienced when they were pushing the analog stick around to get the character to move. And so this is what we can, what you can do. I can jump in this game. I can turn left and right and go up. I can avoid pack ghosts. But again, what is the feeling? What is actually, how is it transforming my body is the important question. And the drawings that come up are in some ways related to these kind of fine art pieces. We have on the left Journey, and when you play Journey, you are moving with very graceful movements. It's like the character is inspired by Chinese kites, and sort of you're a kite on an abstract level, and you're floating around and you're catching the gusts of winds. Pac-Man, when you start to follow Pac-Man around, you realize all you're doing is you're following like a network of horizontal and vertical lines to try and avoid the pack ghosts. And if you play Vanquish, then you have these speed boosts where you're sort of moving around very aggressively. And it can, in a very sort of objective way, be related to what the artists of these paintings were experiencing firsthand when they were creating those artworks. But with a video game, the aesthetic, the visuals might be different, but we are inviting players to experience these same gestures physically. And this might seem like a faraway suggestion for some of you, but there's even a game called Pac Mondrian, created by a team in Canada. So you have the original Mondrian on the left and Pac Mondrian on the right, where you can see the painting is being digitized, and you sort of have to avoid the ghosts along this new kind of more nicer, more beautiful network. And so again, I sort of invite you to contemplate this, that what we're doing, and here in the middle is a video of Mondrian at work. So his gestures moving horizontally up and down to create these network of lines is in some ways exactly what you experience when you play Pac-Man. And so to use this as a way to consider what else we could do with video games, with this concept of, like, again, what are the nouns that we give players to manipulate? What are the affordances, the verbs that they can do with those objects? And so the question is, can games transport the memory of the designer's body and sensations? And I would argue that that is true. Usually, again, our reference point is Assassin's Creed or Mario, but I would say that we're kind of entering a golden age of computer game design where, like we saw with That Dragon Cancer and Florence and the Graveyards, there are so many more experiences that are left yet to experience. And the idea is that we can start to think about, from the cultural heritage aspect, about personally meaningful nouns, personally meaningful objects. So here we have a feather or an angular stone. So each one of these could be on some level sort of an abstract reference point for the character and journey, or for the graveyards. We're using tactile objects from our surroundings to inspire maybe a physical board game-like prototype, or something that could eventually be turned into a video game. And when we start thinking about personally meaningful objects, kites, feathers, sort of a special stone, we can also look at towards artwork like Catalogue from Barbara Iwans. She did a wonderful art piece where she photographed close to 13,000 objects in her own home over a space of a year. And it's just to reflect on just how much stuff we have around us. Some of it's less meaningful, some of it more meaningful. And each one of those invites us to look at an object again and think in a very playful sense, how could this be turned into a video game, and what would the consequences or the consequences would be on the player's body if that were the case. And there's also the work of Peter Menzel, who also similarly photographed families and all their possessions in different cultures around the world. So it's also just to reflect on, what else can we offer players to embody that isn't an agile, super powerful assassin or athlete. So coming back to this game, the Royal Game of Or, in its time, it was like had the success of Fortnite that Fortnite has today, and there are still, to this day, instances of it that were found in Crete and as far afield as Sri Lanka. So this is along the ancient Silk Road, of course, that this kind of very exciting board game spread. And so in some way, to kind of bring this home, to summarize it, what I find really wonderful about this replica, it's a very cheap one compared to what we see there, but even just having these tetrahedral dice in my hands, even just by knowing what the rules are of this game, what my body has to do to perform the gameplay along with somebody else, that we put our tokens on the board, we cycle them around and hopefully get them off the board before somebody else does. The power here is that I am physically connected to the people who lived in these places around the world some 5,000 years ago, that I am performing the same actions that they did. And if I close my eyes, I'm feeling the same sensory objects that they did. And this is a very powerful way of kind of conserving culture. What are the physical activities that we can conserve when we think about nouns and when we think about the affordances, and how we structure the video game environment around that. And this is kind of usually where I would finish my presentation, but since we're in the Department of Engineering and Architecture, I thought I would just add this very important quote from Huizinga. So civilization is in its earliest phases played. And civilization does not come from play, it arises in and as play. It's a bit awkward to interpret this in some ways, but I want to highlight that these tetrahedral dice and these cylinders are in many ways related to sacred geometry. So this is like revolutionary technology and science of the time, going back to the ancient Sumers. They were turned into game objects, and they're sensory objects that became components for the royal game of war. The first game that is arguably the precursor to football, the Olmec, was designed by the Olmec robber people. It's a game where you have to use your hips to shoot this latex ball through that hoop. And it was designed because the civilization had developed the technology to create latex. And as it says here, it's a pretty safe bet that they were engineering materials to suit their needs. It wasn't just a haphazard concoction. So they had something that had practical value for the civilization, the Olmec civilization, and there was a playful side to this technology that was developed. Spears had a practical function for hunting, but they were soon, of course, used for sports to demonstrate people's agility. Cards, playing cards, and dominoes sort of came from woodblock printing. You know, there's a direct relationship between materials, technology development, and always this playful curiosity. We have something that is of value for our society, but let's have some fun with it. That always seems to be the question that is sneaking around everyone's head. Plastic was developed, and I have to sort of research this a bit more, but apparently it was combs made from ivory to overcome sort of like that the ivory and tortoise shells, of course, were sort of endangered animals, and to preserve them, plastic was developed as part of this sort of drive to find a solution. And of course, games like billiard balls and countless of other sort of sports are direct results. Combustion engines, of course, in sports, and the computer, without a doubt, having a sort of a military and civil function. And of course, one of the first game ever created, Tennis for Two in 1958. And so this is what I'd like to leave you with, that's this concept of nouns. You know, what are the objects that we embody? What affordances do they give us? And also from an engineering and architectural perspective, it's also to think what comes in the future. You know, it's always there's a practical value for these things, but there's always a playful side to us where we can potentially imagine new purposes for these things in a board game context or a video game context. So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much for this very nice presentation, to the insights and to this link between game design and which comes into the more engineering field. And yeah, I think there are very many similarities and which we can build up. But yeah, I would first give the chance to the audience to ask some questions.
So thank you very much, Chris. I'm very excited actually that you came here to actually present us maybe a different point of view on also providing us actually a different point of view on the whole seminar series. I have grown up playing video games and so on, and I think have made me the designer, the architect that I am, also because I've experienced spaces through the lenses of video games. Throughout your presentation, there is some references that came to mind. Notes on Blindness is a VR experience where it's autobiographical by the author, where you are in complete darkness, and the only way that you understand space in this virtual reality environment is through sounds. So sound sources determines through bursts of color that give you a sense of where the sound comes from, but also how the space around you is made on and so on. And maybe you could comment a little bit further how actually embodiment of experiencing space or experiencing senses in sort of video games or in gaming actually help us, as you said, this memory bring us to understanding our real world in more profound way and so on. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So thank you for your inputs, Fabio. So the main example I give is often the rubber hand illusion. I don't know, has anybody heard of that before? If not, then there are a lot of very comical examples on YouTube. The experiment is quite simple, that they have a rubber hand in sight of you, so you see it on the table, and you hide your real hand underneath out of view, and they stroke your real hand, for instance, and they stroke the rubber hand. And in just a matter of like 10, 20 seconds, your brain starts to think that where you're feeling the sensation is with the rubber hand. So it's, and at some point they can even stop stroking your own hand, and every time the rubber hand is stroked, you still think you feel that sensation there. This is something that happens automatically, and it highlights just how easy it is for our body to kind of abandon us and imagine that what we're focused on is us. And this happens every time we play video games, because there's an aspect to this rubber hand experiment where it's almost automated. They link the two fingers together, so every time, it doesn't even need an external person. You lift up your finger, and there's like a joint that moves up the rubber hand. And so what is happening is that you're putting an input in, and you're seeing an output, but it's not where you expect it to be, but your brain says, everything is okay. that rubber hand, the finger moving is me. It must be. I can see it. I'm doing an action, and I can see it. And so when we play games, it's the same thing. I press left, and Mario moves left. I press right, Mario moves right. Mario hits something. I might not feel the pain in my body, but of course there are neuroscience studies that show us that there is a muscular reaction even when we're looking at static images, when there's no physical interaction. This is amplified when we are actually interacting with the object or with a virtual space. And so to your question, Fabio, so this is what is happening when we're playing video games. Again, I might not feel like an elderly person when I'm playing the graveyard, but there is a natural connection that I begin to have. Like when I have to move slowly and I see the character, there's no point in me moving very quickly because the character is designed not to catch up. It's designed to maybe even stumble a bit more in doing so. And so this is a very powerful physical way of sharing these sensations. And that's why I love the idea of extending this method or this way of seeing to self-expression and to cultural heritage, where we can start to design games around like an activity, like from an endangered culture, for instance, a way a farmer might work or the way materials might be produced. Just by thinking in a very abstract sense, looking at the farmer, and seeing what gestures they are doing. And if anyone, again, another 80s sort of reference, but if anyone has seen The Karate Kid, probably, yeah, not everyone might be, but there was this film where the master of The Karate Kid just told him to wax on, wax off, and he had to paint the fence over and over again. And he's like, I'm fed up. I've had enough. I don't want to, fix your fences in your garden. And then he starts fighting, and he realizes all the gestures he's been sort of repeating, the up and down are kind of defense gestures. And so, in a way, in a very kind of sort of retro way, this is what we can do as well. We're sort of like looking in some ways to document physical activity and sensory experience. And it doesn't have to be entertaining, but by thinking, whatever it is, slow, fast, meaningful or not, what is that activity? And when we start to think about the structure of the video game, again, it might be presented in like the Donut County style aesthetic, but we are still nonetheless allowing the player to move in a way that physically connects them with a person that still is alive or somebody who is lived 5,000 years ago. And this is really fascinating. Okay, thank you.
We would still have time for one or two questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't have much experience with video games, but what caught my attention was that you used the word limited to express the actions of the players or figures. And for me, I was thinking these figures can do things that we cannot do in real life, like assassinate or be a petal or a hole, and experience that. And then you mentioned the words freedom and control. So for me, both framings make sense. So the game designer decides what actions are possible, but at the same time enables the player to experience things that we cannot experience in real life. So I was wondering if you had some more thoughts on that you could share.
Sure, no, thank you very much for your question. Yeah, so that one particularly related, when I said limited affordances, is that like in a game like Uncharted, it's sort of a game where you play like an Indiana Jones style character, and you can do parkour and climb across a cliff. And the idea is that in a real world, a cliff climber could climb any part of this cliff, but in a video game, there are specific pathways that have been designed where that is possible and when it is not. And so as a designer of video games, I mean, this is already changing with AI, so I think this might be redundant in 5 or 10 years. But using the current technology, you know, there is, not everything is interactable. You know, in Uncharted, the trees have no affordance value at all. You know, you can, or at least you can bump into them, but you can't climb them. No one has programmed it so you can climb a tree. You can climb cliffs, but in specific locations, and that's what that was referring to. But at the same time, of course, as you say, there are a lot of, there is the freedom to express yourself within the curated scope that the game offers you. I think that's, and by curated, that's, you know, how fast I can run, how fast I can turn, what I can do, and you know, which cliff holes I can use. It's very limited compared to reality, where I can walk up to a tree and climb it, I can pull a leaf off. There are things that I could not do in Uncharted because that wasn't the vision of the designers, but it might be the vision of another game.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one more?
If not, I have one little exercise for everybody that I wanted to finish on. Just a very topical one as well. So this one we often do with our students, where we have a piece of paper and doing this blind drawing exercise. So you just focus and you have to copy this signature as big as possible. The idea is to really feel the aesthetics, so like how the line quality is influencing your body movements. And you can do this with your own signature, so I invite you to go home afterwards and take an A4 piece of paper like this and draw your signature as big as possible. And so if everyone could do, since we don't have paper or pencils, if you could just do like a music conductor, I don't know, just kind of trace the lines like this. It's optional, of course I don't wish to make everyone, but if you could just imagine tracing the lines and being aware of like the fluidity of the movements. So I use shape language as a way to allow us to quantify what we're seeing, shape language being related to circles, squares, and triangles. Okay, so how did that make you feel? Now try this one with this signature. So try, yeah, and for people who are very delicate in their gestures, you often find it's very interesting psychologically, you find it quite hard to mimic these lines because people are very delicate. Somehow on a subconscious level, they're thinking, I don't want to behave this aggressively in public. And so when they do the drawings, always the spikes are a little rounded, a little wider. And it's a very interesting assignment to do. And what we're doing is we're kind of mimicking the gestures of these signatures without knowing who these people are. But can someone actually say who these signatures belong to? Do you recognize that? Yeah, Trump. So the one on the right is Trump, and the one on the left is Kamala Harris's signature. And so what is fascinating about this and related to games is that you've, for that moment in this, with a pencil and paper, it's better, more effective, but for that one moment, you've embodied Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. You've felt what it's like to move a pencil along a piece of paper like Kamala Harris, or to embody this very sharp, angular gestures of Donald Trump. And even Donald Trump's signature can be more curved sometimes. So he has his good days. He must have been very aggressive on this day. But this is what I mean by embedding cultural heritage. Sort of like we can even do this with a signature. We can document this. It's like our body is almost like a seismograph, the machine that senses earthquake tremors. Where as artists, we have to be very sensitive to these movements. And we know that curved lines are going to be more fluid, more relaxing, and it depends on how quickly you do this, whereas angular lines create a completely different jarring motion, and that's something that we experience in real life in board games and video games. And just to bring this home, how does it feel to slide down a fluid slide like this versus something that's clearly sort of doesn't have the user's well-being in mind, like Donald Trump's, in relation to Donald Trump's signature. So yeah, I'll just finish there. I mean, I'm very happy to meet you all at the APRO now. I'm very happy to discuss collaborations always, or my work with Bloom, which is my new art school. But yeah, again, very, very happy and grateful for this opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris. Thank you once again. I think we have the possibility to discuss some things afterwards during the apéro. Before going to the apéro, I would like to announce the next talk 2, Leveraging Inductive Bias for Physically Consistent Machine Learning Applications in Engineering System, held by Olga Fink from the APFL on the 28th of November. And now, enjoy.